the chair of the Canadian Association of Postdoctoral Scholars. We're a member of iCoursa, and I'm a current postdoc myself, and I'll be focusing on a pretty specific challenge that postdocs in Canada face regarding postdocs who hold fellowships and their access to social benefits. So for a brief introduction to CAPS, we were founded in 2009. We are for postdocs by postdocs. We represent all postdocs in Canada, as well as Canadian postdocs who are working abroad. We're completely volunteer. All of my colleagues are also postdocs or fairly recent former postdocs like myself. And we're not for profit. Our membership includes all of those current postdocs, but also former postdocs. Membership is for life. And we also have membership options for affiliate organizations like postdoc associations who are active in their local institutions, as well as postdoc unions and postdoc offices who maybe represent the administrative capacity relating to postdocs, and other organizations such as iCoursa. Our mandate is simple but very ambitious, which is to improve the lives of all postdocs. And the three main ways that we do this are advocacy, data collection to support that advocacy, and also community building. So this is where, as a National Research Staff Association, we really come into a lot of importance because we connect postdoc associations across the country. Obviously, there's a lot of high turnover with postdocs in these temporary research contracts. And so being able to have this sort of national institutional knowledge about what the issues are and what the current advocacy recommendations are to support postdocs has been very valuable for our community. As Carolina mentioned, we have a project that is currently ongoing. So CAPS, since its founding, has issued national postdoctoral surveys in Canada. These happen only every 3 to 4 years. The last survey to be published was the one that started collecting data in 2019 through 2020. And this one actually included the first ever longitudinal analysis covering all 10 years of data collection up till that point. 2024 is a very exciting year for CAPS because it is a survey year. So we currently have a survey open. But in today's presentation, I'll be presenting some of the data we have from the last survey, which closed in 2020. And the full survey report is available in both English and French on our website. And I would like to thank the funding that we received from the Burroughs Wellcome Fund and the three agencies in Canada that support our research. So today, as a postdoc in Canada, what you need to know is that 71% of postdocs have employee status at their institutions. This is something that has changed a lot recently. That number has nearly doubled since just 2013. And employee status is important because this gives access to employee benefits that make the career position a bit more stable. These include extended health benefits like specialist support for like dental or vision, but also access to the Canadian pension plan and employment insurance. And also it means that as an employee, you have the option to be represented by a union if one exists at your institution. Now, the problem today is that postdocs who are supported by fellowships lose employee status, and that means that they often lose their access to these benefits, which are very important for maintaining their working conditions and career progression, and they also lose representation by their unions. So why? This largely comes down to institutional policies. Postdocs who have fellowships are considered externally funded. Most funding organizations, at least in the past, would pay fellowships directly to postdocs instead of through the institution. And so from the institution's point of view, they were not paying the postdocs, so therefore they're not employing the postdocs. Our recommendations are basically to reverse all of those policies. We think that all full-time postdoctoral researchers and scholars should have employee status, and that this should not be lost when external funding is attained. I'll also point out that a lot of institutions actually require postdocs to apply for external funding, even when that may put them in a very precarious situation regarding their benefits and working conditions. A side recommendation, which is mostly completed at this point, is that funding organizations should consider having some sort of mechanism to pay through institutions if this is indeed what is required to maintain employee status. So the reason this is a little bit of an update is because most of the fellowship holders in Canada are supported by Canadian federal fellowships, and these have actually been paid through institutions instead of to postdocs directly since 2019. CAPS, unfortunately, hears from a lot of postdocs who are supported by these fellowships that they're still losing employee status and they're still losing access to their benefits. So today in 2024, our estimate from talking to our membership is that 1/3 to 2/3 of these institutions have not updated their policies to take into account the fact that the federal agencies have allowed for fellowship holders to still be considered employees of the institution. So this is where CAPS is really keen to do a lot of advocacy. And to step back and give you a little bit more context from what we have in the survey about Canadian postdocs in general, in 2009, when we first started collecting data and CAPS was born, we had 6,000 postdocs. This number has grown. Today, it's between 10,000 and 11,000. The age of postdocs in Canada, 25 to 54 years, with an average of 33 years. We have balanced female and male ratios. Most of our postdocs are international. I believe this is common with most countries that have postdocs. This is 61%, and this is a number that's really held constant since we've been collecting data. About a third of postdocs have dependents, but this seems to have been dropping over time. And as I mentioned before, a lot of postdocs have employee status, 71%. Most of these are institutional employees. Some of these are considered employees directly of their supervisors. And for that remainder, it's people who are classified as students, which of course these are PhD holders. There's no reason we really think they should be classified as students. Some of them are classified as contractors, guests, and actually 10% don't even know. So there's always a huge problem with transparency about employment conditions as well. I'll also note that about half of postdocs are members of a postdoc union, association, or both. So that's kind of the community networking across Canada. So some of the critical challenges faced by postdocs come out in this data. We have a lot of postdocs who are on short 1 to 2 year contracts that are continuously renewed if you're staying for a postdoc longer. Pay is typically low. The median was 52,000 Canadian per year in 2020, and a quarter were earning less than 45,000 Canadian a year. 40% of postdocs were lacking access to extended benefits. Part of that is because of this fellowship issue where fellowship holders are losing benefits that they otherwise would be provided. 80% of postdocs report severe mental health issues, and 44% of postdocs are not very satisfied by the use of their postdocs in terms of their total career outcomes, rating their postdoc as moderately to not at all important for their career when they leave academia, which of course is most postdocs. So one point I want to make here is that our data collects all of these challenges. This helps us figure out our own advocacy agenda, but also helps us inform research staff associations and unions across the country. And together we all want to work to address these challenges. So in terms of Canadian postdoc funding sources, this is also data from the survey. Half of postdocs are supported by their supervisors' grants. And there's 10% that might hold internal institutional fellowships. And then it's about 34% that would be externally funded, either by international funding that postdocs might be bringing from their home countries or from a quarter of fellowships, which are from federal granting agencies. So that 34%, that's the population of postdocs that are at risk of losing their employee status and benefits. Together with the survey, we don't just support the data, we also report our recommendations. And so we make recommendations at several levels, from government and policymakers to funding institutions like the federal agencies that supply those fellowships, also to postdoc employers and administrators, postdoc associations and unions, and advice for individual postdocs. For today's topic, employee status is really the most relevant recommendation that we've made from the 2020 survey. And this is a recommendation that we're making primarily at the level of postdoc employers. But of course, postdoc associations, unions, and individuals all have a role to play in terms of their local advocacy efforts. Canadian postdoc employee status, as I said, it's a total of 71% have employee status. But if we compare this to preferred classification, it's a much higher number. So 83% of postdocs outside of Quebec prefer employee status. Oh, sorry. In Quebec, the situation is a little bit different because they are exempt from provincial taxes if they are considered a student. But I'll also point out that the majority of postdocs that don't prefer employee status actually just don't know what they would prefer. So it really is kind of this situation that we hope that all of Canadian postdocs will move towards in the future. Part of the reason employee status is so important is because with that rise in employee status over the last few years, we've seen a huge increase in the number of benefits that postdocs have. So I know this is a big table, it's available in the report online, but just to highlight a few, in 2009, dental insurance, only 38% of postdocs had access to that. In 2020, it was 72%. For paid parental leave in 2009, 12% of postdocs had access. In 2020, it was 61%. We think there's a lot of room for access to those benefits and grow. And we think that unifying employee status for postdocs is one of the major policy changes that we can do to support that. And then I'd mentioned that unions and associations are really important in terms of the local advocacy efforts to actually talk to their institutions' leadership and administration to make the situation clear that postdocs need better support. And part of this has to do with their employment and working conditions. And so far, it's only about half of postdocs that actually have some sort of local network that would be able to do this work. So another thing that CAPS is doing is also trying to help postdocs network with each other. And by connecting with our association, also they receive a lot of information about the different recommendations and data that we have concerning working conditions. So just to recap, this was the slide I showed before. The problem is that postdocs supported by fellowships are losing employee status and the benefits that come with that, largely due to institutional policies. It's a problem that affects about a third of postdocs. And the part that's really frustrating to us is that a lot of the work has already been done at the level of funding organizations, because now there is a mechanism for most postdocs, 20%, so a large part of that third, to actually be able to retain this status. And we're frustrated by the fact that we hear from most of our members who are supported by these federal fellowships that they're actually still losing employee status and benefits. And then my final or almost final slide is what we're doing to improve this. So I've outlined a lot of this, but to summarize, advocating to funding organizations. Most of the work has been done there because of the steps that the federal organizations have taken to align how they pay fellowships with what would protect postdocs best at their institutions. But then also the advocacy to postdoc employers and updating institutional policies. There's two main national groups that represent postdoc administration and universities, CAPA and CAGS. We've already presented at their board meetings this year, and we're also presenting as panelists at their annual general meetings in the coming month. So those are two key groups that reach most postdoc employers. Informing postdoc associations, unions, and individuals for advocacy efforts locally. Tomorrow, as part of Postdoc Appreciation Week, we are actually working with a staff organizer to host a workshop on how to form a union and guarantee better working conditions. Of course, we're also continuing to collect data. The national surveys have been super important for CAP's work over the last 15 years, and Survey 2024 is currently collecting responses. And lastly, learning about policy solutions from other organizations around the world to see what's working well in other countries and what some of the challenges have been in terms of these different funding and mechanisms to kind of protect fellowship holders. So being part of iCoursa has been really valuable to us for learning about these and also participating in initiatives like today's event. So a thank you to all of my fellow panelists who will be following up, and as well to our attendees for making this event as useful as it undoubtedly will be. And then the slide I will end with is the advertisement for our 2024 survey, which is now open. This collects data from current postdocs, former postdocs, because career outcomes are really important to know, and postdocs in Canada as well as Canadians abroad. So I know we have an international audience. So if you have Canadian postdocs in your network or former Canadian postdocs in your network, please tell them about the survey. We're collecting responses through December 1st this year, and all of the information is available on our website. So that's the end of my presentation.
Okay, thank you so much, Annie, and thank you for mentioning the importance of iCourse and other associations in unions as well. And we'll have speakers that also participate in unions, which is very important for this session. Just to remind that the Q&A, the questions will be will be addressed in the end. So I'll continue with the presentations. We have now Dr. Ana Ferreira. She's an assistant research in sociology of science and science technology studies at the Interdisciplinary Center of Social Sciences, so SIX Nova, at the Faculty of Social Science and Humanities of the Nova University of Lisbon. Dr. Ferreira is also coordinated advocacy group for researchers and research managers in the same faculty, and she's currently a member of the Department of Research and Innovation at FEMPROF, the Portuguese National Federation of Professors. She'll give us an overview of the Portuguese context in terms of shifting policies of research fellowships to research contracts, and she will also present some data for recent studies on the impacts of fellowships and short-term contracts. Dr. Ana, please.
Thank you very much, Carolina. Thank you for the invitation to be here today and to be able to share with you some of the data that I've collected over the past couple of years. I start sharing my presentation now. Are you looking at it? You are?
Yes.
Okay. Now I just need to, okay, this needs to be, okay, so I will talk about scientific precarity in Portugal, but to do this, I will start taking one step back, looking at the transformations that scientific organizations have had over the past couple of decades. And the way that I've been studying them is through the impacts of the knowledge economy that have pushed scientific organizations towards several transformations, both at the level of the organizational structure, replicating private management and governance models, and having a huge increase in precarious workers. Also in terms of scientific practices, with knowledge instrumentalization being the norm, either through projects of short duration or through the application-driven models of science, but also in the culture of the academic field that is today severely marked by a performativity culture that puts competition above everything. In Portugal, these transformations were concomitant to several transformations as well of the laws. On the one hand, we have the institutionalization of the new public management principles that I talked, some of them that I briefly approached in the previous slide, through two different laws, the RGES and RGICT. This was accompanied by a severe growth that you can see in the number of PhD holders in Portugal over the past couple of decades. And today with approximately 2,000 new PhD holders every year, but also, and because of this, the pressure that all these new PhD holders have in the system, the past governments felt that there was a need to change in the law, things in the law, because most of these postdoctoral workers had postdoctoral fellowships which meant that they were not entitled as and told us about for the Canadian case to any employee status. So they were fellowship holders with no access to any sort of, or to with access to very limited social benefits. And all the science was pretty much based on these fellowship holders. So in 2016 and 2017, there were a couple of changes in the laws in Portugal, and the laws that were actually implemented. The names are there, but for the sake of the presentation, I will not go over this. But pretty much what happened was that there was very little integration of scientific workers and mainly researchers in scientific careers. But what happened was that they pretty much transformed the fellowships, a big number of fellowships, into fixed term contracts. So this means that people will be entitled, so researchers will be entitled to an employee status and all the rights that are and the social benefits that are associated with it through the timing of their contracts that can go anywhere from 1 to 6 years. But at the end, they are, on the one hand, during all this time, they are still precarious. And at the end, they will still will have to apply for the following job contracts. Pretty much what happened is that after 2016, 2017, in the case of researchers, there were attributed 7,000 new research contracts, and only 200 of these new contracts were permanent contracts. All others were precarious. Despite of this scenario, which means that over 95% of the contracts are precarious. In spite of this scenario, no recent research in Portugal had characterized precarious scientific workers, their work and labor relations, nor their subjective relations with scientific activities and their lives. So what we wanted to do at that point was to understand who were these precarious scientific workers, what characterized their labor trajectories and their academic activities, and how do these workers subjectively experience their scientific activities of precarity. And for this, we applied an online questionnaire. We had almost 3,000 validated responses. we actually went through researchers, teachers, and research and management administrators at academic institutions. We go through all career stage, both with and people with and without a PhD. And we addressed people with academics with fixed-term contracts, fellowships, doing independent work, or actually staying in the academia without their work being paid. For the purpose of today's presentation, I will strictly focus on PhD holders with fixed-term contracts or postdoctoral fellowships. This questionnaire was able to reach all major scientific areas, and this was the distribution of the responses. In the case of postdoctoral postdoctoral fellowship holders and fixed-term contracts, what we have is that we can see that all ages are covered pretty much, with the average age for fixed-term contracts of 41 and for fellowship holders, postdoctoral fellowship holders of 38. More than half of them have children or other dependents, and they present very low fertility rates. So it's around 1 for the fixed-term contracts holders. For the postdoctoral fellowship holders is 0.64. This is under the fertility rate of the general Portuguese population and under the fertility rate for other qualified groups in Portugal. This means that for every woman between 15 and 50 years old, she would have on average one daughter or son. In terms of the characterization of sex, what we have is that this precarious academics with a PhD are mainly women. Over 60% are women. About 30% are men, and others are a very low frequency. Not only we have a pattern of a high prevalence of women, but this pattern is not stable if we look through the different, what we could see as different career stages of the scientific trajectory. So there is a higher, in general, there is a higher probability of being a woman, but there is a higher probability of being a woman the fellowship holder, which would be the first stage of this academic trajectory. There is a higher probability of being a woman and a junior researcher already with a fixed-term contract, which would be the second stage of this academic trajectory. And for every single stage above junior researcher, meaning assistant researcher, principal researcher, there is a higher probability of being a man. So this means that not only there is a higher percentage of women, but they are mainly located in the lower categories of the scientific trajectories, being postdoctoral fellows or junior researchers with a fixed-term contract. In terms of trajectories, what we can see is that these PhD holders, precarious PhD holders, present very long trajectories of scientific precarity. If you look at the graph on your lower left quadrant of your screen, you can see that for both for fixed-term contract holders and for postdoctoral fellowship holders, about 85 to 90% of them have had fellowships for over 5 years, and 43 and 36% for over 10 years. So this means that these people, these academics, have had fellowships over and over, one after the other. The pattern is the opposite when we looked at total time with fixed-term contracts, with 75% of the academics with the fixed-term contracts in their first fixed-term contracts in their lives, which is actually a consequence of the legislative initiatives that took place in 2016 and 2017, and with about 85% of fellowship holders not having had one single fixed-term contract in their life, meaning that they have through all their career, they've had very limited access to social benefits associated with the employee status. These trajectories of precarity can also be analyzed through their speeches, because the analysis of this questionnaire combined quantitative and qualitative data. And so what you can see on the right-hand side of your screen is some of these narratives that we've collected from postdoctoral and fixed-term contract holders. So the first one says that she or he was a postdoctoral fellow for 3 years. And on the first opportunity, I was awarded a fixed term contract. 5 years later, I'm unemployed. So you have a postdoc fellow, fixed term contract, and then unemployment. And then this order is reversed in other situations. Someone says that they were unemployed between these months and that months, and then they had a postdoctoral fellowship, and now they have a fixed term contract. So these people jump from different types of precarious contracts and periods that are interspersed with periods of absolutely no income in which they continue to pay. What this means is that the people that stay in academia are only the ones that can stay in academia. And this is particularly well analyzed or seen through the speeches through the last two speeches that I have on this slide. Someone says that fortunately my husband always had a stable job, which allowed me to make these choices up to the present day. Or someone else that says that she or he feels ashamed with his family because of being always at risk of unemployment. So people are very much aware of their situation, that they can be at any time unemployed without any access to income. And so the only ones that stay are the ones that have the social relations that allow them to stay in the academia. In terms of working journeys, what we can see is that the working journeys of these precarious academics are very, very long. So more than 60% work more than 40 hours a week. Between 11 and 70% work more than 50 hours a week. So this is reproducing other patterns that I've seen in other geographies around the world. In terms of papers, and we had questions regarding many types of publications. I'm just showing you the data regarding Web of Science and Scopus indexed papers. And what we can see is that about 90% of all precarious postdoctoral holders have produced at least between 1 and 4 index papers on the previous years, and a significant percentage, more than 5 papers in index, for more than 5 publications, 5 or more index publications in these journals on the previous years. So they have very long working weeks, and they do publish according to what I've understood as the patterns of excellence in the academic field. The other thing that we wanted to assess was what were the impacts of this scientific precarity. And one of the variables that we wanted to address was, and we assessed this both quantitatively, which is on the left-hand side of your screen, and qualitatively, which is on the right-hand side of your screen. So regarding the impacts on their institutional participation and the work they develop, what we can see is that these academics report to have less time for academic activities, long working hours, lack of participation in decision-making bodies, and the other ones that are said that. And this is reproduced both also qualitative when they talk about the limits to intellectual independence, limits to the development of more innovative projects requiring more time and thought, pressure to publish, reducing the scientific quality, or things like dependence on institutional decision-making on career management and work, or the impossibility of influencing the governance of my institution. In terms of their life trajectories, the impacts of precarity are also pretty severe, with over 90% of the respondents referring to this. And when asked directly about it, they talk about the life suspended without stability, not seeing a future, or the postponement of parental plans, both maternity and paternity, of course. We've also assessed the impacts of precarity on professional burnout. We did this through the use of a psychometric evaluation inspired by the Mashlak burnout inventory, which addresses 3 dimensions of professional burnout. They are called emotional exhaustion, skepticism on the work that is developed, and professional efficiency. And the way we look at this is we quantify each of these dimensions, and for about a third of the fixed term contracts and a bit over 43% of the fellowship holders present high levels of emotional exhaustion, and another third or fourth considerable levels. In terms of skepticism, pretty much the same pattern. In terms of professional efficiency, so what we want to look is at the low levels of professional efficiency, and this goes between 25 and 31%. The way we connect this quantification of professional burnout to precarity is through the speeches of our respondents. When they tell us about extreme tiredness on uncertainty, or things like precarity is responsible for stress and anxiety, that is sometimes difficult to explain to our families. How can we live like this? Or they mention the gradual lack of enthusiasm for all life dimensions, constant fear of failing grant deadlines, constant anxiety, and anxiety as a background or despair. So the question is, in face of all these impacts, why do they stay, right? And when we look, and for this, we've actually analyzed satisfaction with work and with work conditions. And what we can see is that, and I'm not intent, it's not, the idea is not for you to look at the, at these graphs to analyze them in any sort of deep analysis. Is just to tell you that pretty much what we can see is that precarious postdoctoral researchers like very much what they do. They don't like at all the type of job contracts or fellowships that they have, or the fact that they cannot progress within a career. Also, their narratives pretty much point out to the same things when they're saying that despite research being fascinating, the precarious work conditions are truly unattractive. There are limits to what one can support. The passion for this work can't compensate for everything else. So pretty much they reproduce this love for science, passion for scientific knowledge that has been seen throughout other studies. We also asked regarding if they were actually searching for a job. And most of the respondents in the case of fixed-term contracts were not, over 60%. The pattern is slightly different in terms of fellowship holders, with 58% actually looking for a job. But when we ask them what type of job they want, most of them want to stay in the academia. So almost 90%, between 85 and 90% of them want to stay in academia, either in teaching or doing academic research, only doing research, or only doing teaching. So despite of all the impacts of precarity, they still want to stay doing what they are already doing. So to summarize what I was telling you, so this questionnaire, what showed us was the long trajectories of precarity that affect the entire span of the working period of precarious workers. And we can see this when you look at the whole sample of responses that we get. We get respondents that are 21 years old until 67 years old. So it's the whole working span in Portugal. There is the interspersing of different types of contracts and periods without income, which reproduce obviously broader social inequalities. There is the prevalence of structural asymmetries, and I showed you the case of gender, but it's the same for others, including social class. There is a feminization and exclusion from higher categories. Precarity impacts on the work outputs, with quantity prevailing over quality, decreased academic freedom and pressure from hierarchical superiors, long working hours, problems with physical and mental health. I did not show you the data, but there is also reports on workplace harassment and insufficient social protection mechanisms, like the one our colleague from Canada was telling us about, and a lot of concerns about retirement, because most of these people have spent, like I've showed you, very long times with postdoctoral fellowships, which means that they will not have an adequate retirement plan when they retire. And remember that a lot of these people are in their 60s already. So what we can tell in terms of the legislative transformations is that these transformations did allow for increasing the number of fixed-term contracts, changing a system from one that was pretty much built on postdoctoral fellowships to one that is built on fixed-term contracts, but this did not solve the impacts of precarity, which what I showed you today. So we now are at a different stage in Portugal. There is a new program that is called FCT Tenure that actually is expected to integrate about 1,100 precarious academic which is a number that is much higher than previous initiatives. If you probably do not recall, but the previous initiatives only allowed for the integration of about 200 researchers, but still this 1,100 is insufficient considering that the dimension of the Portuguese scientific and technological system, with today more than 4,000 fixed-term contracts and fellowships, and about 2,000 new PhD holders graduating every year. So we will keep a very close look at this program to see if how it's implemented. There is some news also that institutions are actually, some of them are going to open the positions that were attributed to them. Some of them are trying to postpone this opening. And so we will have a very interesting and year next year, and also a year that it's very, very important for grassroots movements and for trade unions in terms of advocating and fighting for better working conditions in the agreement. And this is it. Most of this work is actually published in a book that came out last year. It's in Portuguese. I'm sorry about that. It's being translated. It's actually has been translated to English, but it's just final. I'm just finalizing the last editions. I have a book chapter published in this book that is published by Routledge. And I'm happy to answer to any questions, and thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Just to say that your short biographies will be made available. So if the participants here want to track you, it's important that they are able to contact you and see your publications that have access to this information. Thank you for the overview and complementing the information, particularly on gender aspects and fertility rates. So we can see actually the lack of employee status, how they affect the whole life of a human being. And we'll now move forward with Dr. Tracy Wittesha, a postdoctoral scholar at the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science, specialized in medieval philosophy. And Dr. Wittesha serves as a spokesperson for Max Planck Society's Postdoc.net. She will share the successful efforts of ending stipends at Max Planck, and also provide us an overview of our ongoing discussions with the German federal government.
Thank you so much. Okay, there we go. So thank you really to Carolina and to iCorza for inviting Max Planck Postdoc.net to be part of this really wonderful event today. And so as Carolina mentioned, I'm the spokesperson for the Max Planck Postdoc.net. So Max Planck Society is one of the major research societies in Germany. And the Postdoc.net, we are a kind of independent network run by our own statutes to represent all postdocs within the Max Planck Society, hopefully through external representatives at the more than 80 Max Planck institutes throughout Germany and a few other countries as well. So Postdoc.net was founded, we're a very, very young organization. We were only founded in 2019. And as I mentioned, we are representing postdoc researchers throughout the Max Planck Society. We have representatives currently probably around 60% of institutes. As you can imagine, with postdocs coming on shorter kind of contract lengths, it's always kind of difficult for us to find representatives at institutes, but we are kind of working at that. So we're represented at about 60% of institutes. And we aim to improve working conditions, the scientific development, and career prospects of postdocs. And what I want to share today is kind of what we do as a network, kind of also within the society, kind of our ground level work, but also some kind of science policy efforts that we have within Germany. So Postdoc.net, like many other postdoc organizations, are run completely by volunteers. And so this is really absolutely fascinating. I always am just so blown away by these postdocs who, come on short contract lengths or trying to find the next position, but also take the time to be part of Postdoc.net. So I really want to especially thank the other members of my steering group who put in a tremendous amount of time and effort to make our network function properly. We also run on several different kind of working groups that are run by working group leaders. And this working group here at the bottom middle, our survey working group, is one of the most amazing working groups we have. They put in a really tremendous amount of work to put forward a survey that we've done for Max Planck postdocs. These efforts to do surveys are extremely important. There's really not that much data available on postdoc researchers in Germany. We are one of the very few networks who do this, along with Leibniz postdoc network, which we also work closely with. So I want to share just kind of a few results from our survey. These results are publicly available. This is the results from 2022. We've also just wrapped up last month our survey for this year for 2024, and the survey working group is currently analyzing those results. So the new results are not yet available, and these are the really great postdocs throughout the Max Planck Society who have done our survey for us and analyzed those results. So our survey consists of answers from around 659 postdocs. This is about 30% of postdocs within the Max Planck Society. The country of origins are stratified as Germany, the EU, Asia, and all others. About 1/3 of our postdocs don't even know if they have a postdoc coordinator at their institutes, and 25% of postdocs are parents. Another really kind of important piece of information is that close to 80% of postdocs in the Max Planck Society are international postdocs. So we are extremely international community, and this is also really important for stipends, fellowships, contracts, and all of these kind of issues. Just very briefly overview from our survey on working conditions, and I'll explain what the E13.3 means in just a moment. But we have found from our survey that the E13 contract situation has mainly been resolved within the society, but there are still some issues to be addressed. Over 50% of postdocs are working multiple weekends per month. And individuals who are on stipends and fellowships are not well informed about their entitlements. So as I mentioned, we are a very fairly young network founded in 2019. And from the very kind of beginning of the founding of the network, those steering groups did a lot of advocacy within the Max Planck Society to really get postdocs off of stipends and fellowships and to get them on contracts, especially for having a demographic of 80% that are international. Being on contracts, of course, is giving these health and social benefits for postdocs. They're being able to pay into the retirement system within Germany. And this is also really important for those kind of postdocs who wish to stay in Germany and receive kind of permanent residency, or maybe eventually also to apply for citizenship, because you have, one of the steps is to prove and have a specific amount of months that you have been on a work contract within Germany. So you can't count that if you are on a stipend or a fellowship. You have to have a contract. From our survey results, we found that so this was one major step that happened at the very early stages of our network, getting postdocs onto contracts. So we have around 535 that are on contracts, 47 on fellowships, 17 on stipends, and 14 were on former contracts, and 20 are unknown. This graph here shows the distribution of employment types across. We have 3 sections within the Max Planck Society. So we have a humanities section, a biomedical section, and a chemistry, physics, and technology section. So you can see that how those are distributed across the 3 sections within the Max Planck Society. So we've also asked postdocs in our survey, how many hours do you work per week? And here you can see, so in Germany, full-time would be 39 hours. You can see a large percentage of postdocs working much more than the 39, especially those who are on stipends and are not on contracts. We also asked how many vacation days have you taken in the past 12 months? Again, you can see, especially those who are on stipends, actually took 0 days, which is very, very sad. And in Germany, the normal amount of vacation days you would have for the year under a normal contract would be around 30 days. So here's also our pay scale distribution among contract holders. So one issue, of course, was getting postdocs off of stipends and onto contracts, which was one major step. Then a second major step was for those postdocs who are actually on contracts to be staged correctly. So in Germany, there's a different kind of pay scale depending on the kind of experience that you've had. So those with a PhD degree and are starting a postdoc contract should be staged at an E13.3. And so this is much more money that you are getting, and this will set you up that you would be on this kind of pay scale for 3 years, and then you would move to the next stage level, which would be an E13.4. The problem that we had found through our network within the society were postdocs who were the international postdocs or postdocs who had gotten their PhD degrees outside of Germany. Those years were not being counted as experience. So they were coming and they were being staged at E13.2. So they're receiving about 5,000 euros less per year. And this was a major thing that PostDocNet was able to achieve within the society and working together with the general administration and set up a task force team. And now we have a kind of a task force letter that we are able to share with postdocs so that they are staged correctly when they begin their postdoc contracts at Max Planck Institutes. So most postdocs are now being staged correctly. We do find that there are still some institutes who are not doing this properly. And the big kind of maybe challenge for us also as a network is to be able to reach out to those who are first starting their contracts, so they're even actually aware of what this kind of staging means in Germany and how they should properly be scaled. Because I think once you start your position at a Max Planck Institute or in Germany, you have about 6 months to say whether or not you have been staged correctly. And so you can see here, so 88% of postdocs are at least E13.3 stage level, but we still have 12% of postdocs below that. So some of the main takeaways from this section of our survey were we had 12% of postdocs are still being staged incorrectly on contracts. 80% of postdocs are working longer than 39 hours a week. And yeah, we have some other 40% of fellowship and stipend holders don't even know the difference between a fellowship stipend and a contract. And just to share also very briefly from our survey, you can also access the more detailed analysis on our website that also kind of goes along with Precarity is personal and professional well-being and mental health of postdocs. And I find this very interesting also with what the others have shared in the presentations before. So we found from our survey that despite general life satisfaction and social support, mental health is almost 3 times worse among our postdocs than in the general population. Work is the most impactful stressor, followed by caring responsibilities. Postdocs felt supported during COVID-19, but are really concerned about future career steps. And I think that's around 60% of postdocs who were worried about their future, especially given trying to complete a postdoc during COVID, and 1/3 of all postdocs have experienced some kind of bullying. So this was basically one of the things that we were able to do within the society is get the majority of our postdocs off of stipends and onto contracts. Going forward in the Max Planck Society, they are establishing a postdoc program so that postdocs who get recruited through this program are actually going to come and receive a minimum contract length of 3 years. And this is one thing PostDocNet is really supporting and advocating for, is actually minimum contract lengths. So trying to cut out these contracts that are for 6 months or for 1 year, and you start your postdoc and you're immediately trying to already find the next position. So it's one thing to help is having a minimum contract length. within the greater country of Germany, our network is also really involved in social science policy discussions. This is called the in English called the academic fixed-term contract length law. And in Germany, so this is kind of a complicated thing, but one of the main things that we focus on with this law, which is currently being discussed within the federal government, is something that's very specific about this law with regard to postdocs. So there are many aspects of this law, but I just want to kind of talk about one of the main aspects that we've been really concerned with within our own postdoc network. And with regard to this law, that's governing fixed-term contracts within academia, basically in a nutshell is you have basically a maximum of 6 years to complete your PhD within Germany, and you have a maximum of 6 years to be on a fixed-term contract in academia. So essentially this means that you have 6 years as a postdoc, and if you don't find a permanent position within those 6 years, basically you're kicked out of science and academia in Germany. There have currently been discussions going on within the past year trying to talk about reforming this kind of federal law, and we've been really involved with these kinds of discussions. So some of the updates that have happened within the past couple of months in Germany with regard to this law was that this law was very quickly passed by the Bundescabinet, and one of the proposals was actually to shorten this 6-year maximum to 4 years for postdocs. And they call it a 4+2 model. So instead of having 6 years, you would only have 4 years as a postdoc. And then you could get an additional 2 years if your employer was thinking of perhaps offering you a permanent position at the end. And yeah, so there have been many kind of updates within this discussion. Unfortunately, this suggested model of 4+2 years for postdocs, which we have been against since the very beginning, has not changed within the past year. They're still kind of discussing this 4+2 model. And so this law was set to go at the very beginning of June to be read in the German Bundestag. This did not take place, but because of this planned reading, Max Planck Postdoc.net, along with many other postdoc networks throughout Germany, came together to actually release a public statement. And I think that our statement was really effective and is perhaps maybe one of the reasons why this reading did not take place in June. So I just want to maybe highlight some of the activities that we've been able to do as a network. At the very beginning, when these discussions came out regarding this law, back in February of 2023, the Postdoc.net wrote an open letter to the postdocs and to the president within the Max Planck Society. In April of 2023, we wrote a joint statement with other German postdoc networks on some kind of key points that were released within a draft of this law that came out in March, that should say 2023. And in June of 2023, we asked for feedback from our postdocs via our external reps and received more than 100 responses. We have found that this law is actually something that really is of great concern to our postdocs. Whenever we have any kind of events or activities regarding this law, we get a very, very high turnout from our postdocs. So it's something they're very concerned about. In July of 2023, we wrote a joint statement, again, with German postdoc networks on a draft of this law. And here are some of the postdoc networks throughout Germany that signed that statement along with us. On our original statement, joint statement from the 4th of July, 2023, some of the main points that we kind of are advocating for is information about the law that should be available in English, because most of this information is only in German. This is especially difficult for postdocs coming, international postdocs coming for a year or two, and they don't actually even have time to learn German. Again, there's this 4+2 model. So our network is saying really this model is very harmful for science. It's going to promote less risky science. We're asking for clear definitions of tenure and permanent positions with very transparent evaluation process. and concrete specifications of the R1 to the R3 phase, especially the R3 phase, and the consideration of additional measures to create permanent positions. For those who are unfamiliar with what the R1 to R4 phases are, I've just put this slide here so you can basically see this. These were recommendations from the EU Council of December of 2023. So very basically, the R2 phases are those basically from the postdoc level, and the R3 phase would be kind of beyond a postdoc, maybe someone with an independent research group, for example, but has not yet reached seniority. So we especially feel that within the law, this R3 phase is not really being addressed. And we don't really know how you can get within 4 years from like an R2 to an R4 phase, for example, because most R3 phase positions in Germany are not tenure track. So we released a statement, as I said, in May, right ahead of these planned discussions in the German Bundestag that ended up not taking place. But in this statement, we've basically have stated that the stated objective of the proposed changes are really incompatible with the problems that we and other status groups have been pointing out for over a year now. Career paths to a permanent position really need to be objectively transparent and clear, and they need to also be globally permeable. And this is something also that I think is really important for today's discussion, because Germany has some very specific kind of rules of how academia is working within this country, but we also need to be able to having these international postdocs and having these career tracks be permeable on a global scale. Again, this continued proposed 4+2 model is placing too much pressure for the development of academic independence and is really detrimental for recruitment and retention of international researchers. We have discussions with so many different postdoc networks within the Max Planck Society itself. Our postdocs come from so many different disciplines that it's very difficult for us to say exactly how many years we want, for example, as a max amount of years, because it's so dependent on also the kind of discipline you come from. But all of our postdocs are really against this 4+2 model. And again, the 4+2 model is really failing to address this complexity of academic careers. So as a last thing, and then I will wrap up here, in our statement, we kind of have 4 core demands. The first is really calling for an academic system in Germany that offers every excellent early career researcher the opportunity to develop academic independence after the doctorate. This requires what we call a framework law and not a kind of restrictive law of having only 4 years or 6 years, for example, to reflect disciplinary requirements in accordance with globally applicable standards. These next core demands that we have, 2 through 4, really aren't demands that the current law itself can really address. But we are asking for very clear, transparent, and objective assessment standards for this R2 and R3 phase. And the recognition that an academic career does not have to be a research career, but can also be a teaching career. A call for a career system for universities to create permanent positions for teaching and to offer early stability by means of permanent positions for long-term tasks. So in Germany, this is something that would have to happen at the level of the state and not the federal level, because this reform of the federal law is reducing it from 6 years to 4 years is not creating more positions, right? It's just creating more precarious situation for researchers in Germany. And the call for professors to be released of high teaching loads so that German universities can do more top level research. So these are some of the also postdoc networks that signed this statement with us, and we found this to be a really fruitful way of getting noticed within science policy measures within Germany, is when all of the postdoc networks come together and can offer these kind of really effective kind of statements. And please feel free to contact us.
Okay, Tracy, thank you so much. Great inputs on the postdocs postdoc overview in Max Planck, so we can have an overview in general, but we also have at the local level. So our next speaker is Jorundahl Norgard. She's a chief advisor and head of international affairs at Norwegian Association of Researchers, NAR. She's also a member of ETUS, Standing Committee for Higher Education and Research. So this is part of the European Trade Union Committee for Education. She'll give us an overview of the Norwegian context and discuss the association national efforts, as well as their advocacy at the EU level and OECD. And I will share her presentation. So just 1 minute.
Thank you for the introduction and the invitation, and thank you for helping out with sharing my slides. I had some technical issues. NAR, just a few words to begin with. NAR is Norway's largest and leading trade union for employees in research and higher education. 74% of our members are in the public sector, 78% work in universities, university colleges, or research institutes. And precarity, and especially working conditions for young researchers, has been a core issue in my union for years. I think the slides are, can you go back?
Yes, it's okay now?
Yes, good, thank you. Anyway, I'm happy for the opportunity to share some of our experiences. And I don't think time allows to dive into too many details, but I'll give you a broad picture and focus mainly on postdocs at the university with fixed-term contracts. And to understand the context, I'll provide you with a few core facts about Norwegian working life, and then address the main challenges as we see it, and show you how we managed to raise a concern for the attractiveness of the research profession, for instance, through a recent survey. And I'll finish up with a few wins and some key takeaways. So next slide, please. There are quite a few things actually worth noticing when it comes to Norwegian working life. It is well organized and regulated. We have what we refer to as the Nordic model, which basically means there is a strong tripartite collaboration between the state, the employers, and the unions. And this also means that there is a strong tradition for social dialogue and collective agreements. The unions have a strong voice. We are invited to the table. We approach and discuss with institutional leaders at the universities and politicians at the national level. And furthermore, and this is important, permanent employment is by law the main rule in Norway, both in public and private sector. And this means that temporary contracts need some sort of a legal basis. And postdocs are by definition legal fixed-term contracts in Norway. And it's fixed term because it's meant to be a qualifying position, the career step prior to seniority or prior to tenure as associated professor or professor. In addition, we have a lot of ordinary research positions on contracts, fixed-term contracts. Many of them are what we call project researchers, and very often they are externally funded. They might have some kind of a permanent contract, but there is a hatch. The contract is permanent only as long as they are able to allocate more research funding, and by that, their own salary. So these positions are vulnerable for sure and easily terminated, although the institutions have to follow certain termination procedures. As a consequence in Norway, institutions tend to use postdoc positions instead of regular employment as a researcher to reduce costs and bureaucracy. Postdocs are legal fixed-term positions, which mean less hassle for the institution. And this has led to a misuse of postdocs positions in Norway and a situation where a decreasing number of postdocs end up in a permanent academic position, which was the original purpose of these positions. And instead, they end up in a year-long temporary employment. And this is also a main reason why the level of temporary employment are at least twice as high in higher education and research in Norway than in Norwegian working life in general. I see I'm already at the main challenges, so I'll just continue. And what we see in Norway now is, and the main challenges are similar to what we've learned already today. The research profession is losing attractiveness. We currently experience reduced public funding of higher education and research and an increased competition and constant race for external funding. And this race for funding, the heavy workloads, the non-competitive salary levels compared to, for instance, industry, and a high degree of uncertainty regarding career prospects, these are the main reasons that the recent survey that we did show that only 1 in 5 postdocs would recommend young talents to commit to a career in research. And also, and furthermore, among those having a permanent position in academia at the universities in Norway, 1 in 3 are looking for alternatives outside academia because of the heavy workloads, the lack of work-life imbalance, also non-competitive salary levels. So although we have a well-organized working life, there are for sure some crucial issues. And these numbers, the only 1 in 5, for instance, is from the survey we conducted in 2022. And at the same time, and in contrast, the government claims higher education and research to be more important than ever, due to major societal challenges, due to technology, due to climate crisis, and the urgent need for a green transition. And the report from our survey is called "I Love Being a Researcher, But," and we need to address the but. And that is what we do when approaching the government over the past few years. More and more we talk about talent lost and about the need to recruit and retain the brightest of us. We address a sense of urgency and we keep questioning why on earth researchers are an exception from the main rule of permanent employment. And to some extent, we succeed. I'll come back to that. Our main point is that we need postdocs, the young researchers, to have sustainable career prospects. We need to facilitate for them to go the extra mile on behalf of all of us. And that's our line of argument. Next slide, please. And this is from the same survey. Just we asked our members what kept them in academia and what made them consider leaving. And you can see it's uncertainty regarding funding, heavy workloads, salary level, lack of job security, career prospects. Can you go back, please? Yeah, thank you. And then, but the main reasons for staying is that they love their job, academic freedom, the professional dedication to their field, the enormous passion for science, the work, the tasks at hand. And the quote here is from this survey, and I think it is important, and we try to argue along these lines. When government claim research and innovation to be more important than ever, they have to walk the talk. Researchers should be allowed to focus on their research, on the big questions, and not whether or not they will have a job next month. And we argue that risks have to be moved from the individual to the institutional and national level. Next slide, please. So fighting precarity, it has been a year-long struggle, and I'm convinced actually that the level of precarity or temporary positions in Norwegian higher education and research would have been even higher if it wasn't for systematic and persistent advocacy. Advocacy both at the national level, but also by the European Trade Union for Education and Education International. The pictures to the left here is from a union-supported campaign in 2008, and the one to the right is a knowledge-based white paper we made in 2021, describing core issues in researchers' working condition. And when we gave this report to the minister at our annual research summit, his response was that the level of temporary employment in higher education must be reduced to the national average. And we keep reminding him of that. And over the years, we have managed to establish a broad political consensus that the high number of temporary positions among researchers is a problem. And as a result, institutions have to report annually on the level of temporary positions, the number of postdocs, etc. And this means that we can monitor the development and keep this issue on the agenda. It also means that the institutions are being questioned by the ministry in their annual dialogue meetings. They have to answer to the lack of progress. And laws and regulation, I will come back to. So we keep campaigning, we do surveys, we conduct research, and we use, I would say, every opportunity in the social dialogue to highlight this issue. And as I said, we try to focus not only on the consequences for the individual researcher, but also for the quality of research, teaching and learning, and for society. And step by step, the situation is improving, but at the same time, we're now in a critical situation with severe cuts in funding, which for sure will have negative impact on, for instance, working conditions for young researchers. And that is for sure a follow-up for us now. Next slide. So some wins, the way I see it. The monitoring I've already mentioned. Another win is the establishment of special committees on research precarity at both national and institutional level. In these committees, employers and the unions work together to improve the situation and working conditions for postdocs and early career researchers. And this is important because this is not only a matter of funding or laws and regulation, it is also a question of culture and having a sound HR policy at institutional level. And more recently, we've had a review of the University Act in Norway. In this process, we had two major wins. We managed to increase the contract length for postdocs from a minimum of 2 years to a minimum of 3 years, which we believe will make qualifying, the scientific development, and independence to achieve that more likely. And in the regulations linked to the University Act, we've managed to define postdoc positions more narrowly. The regulations now specify a postdoc's right to professional development, career guidance, progression, and so on. And this will make it much harder for the universities to continue the misuse of postdoc positions. To employ a postdoc will be more binding. A next step for us is to make sure that some of these regulations also includes postdocs outside of the universities. And finally, due to campaigns on workloads, the ministry have initiated a new national survey on working conditions, including workloads. Next slide, please, the final one. I think this more or less sums up what I've tried to emphasize. Documentation, whether it is statistics or surveys, are important. I don't think I need to tell any of you that, but we experience that politicians are far more likely to listen to facts and figures, and they, on the other hand, put pressure on the institutions. And we use every opportunity to highlight the issue of precarity. We work together. Unions within higher education and research collaborate. For instance, through joint calls to the European Union or the OECD. And I would say that because of joint advocacy, the precarity of the research career is now high on the agenda, both in the EU and at OECD. And this was not the case just a few years ago. So collaborating with key stakeholders that on the other hand, our government listen to and tend to listen to, that is also a good approach to improve the situation. We organize, we network, we exchange experiences like the one we have now today here at this event. And we are patient. We know it takes time to change politics and practice. So it's a step-by-step and ongoing work. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you. Sorry for dealing here with the PowerPoint. Just ending the slides. The slides will be shared afterwards. So we'll finish with Dr. Francisco del Castillo. We'll have the Spanish overview. So he's a molecular geneticist at the genetics department of Hospital Ramón y Cajal in Madrid, Spain. And since 2012, he's part of the board of directors of ANI. Dr. Del Castillo will share with us some of the engagements of the association with the government, Spanish governments, and provide an overview of the challenges and recent legal changes in the law in Spain. Dr. Castillo, please.
Thank you very much. I hope that now you are able to listen to me and to see my presentation, right?
Yes, we can see and hear you.
Okay, so thank you very much for this invitation to present what we have called the pathways to end the precarity in Spain. So a brief note about ANI. ANI is the national organization or association for researchers at hospitals, and now we are in our 20th anniversary. So we are a research staff association like ICORSA. And we are accepting personnel at any stage in their careers and with any degrees. So this means essentially technicians, postdoctoral students, postdocs and group leaders and whatever that are doing research within the national health systems. We are interacting with all the stakeholders, meaning the institutions that are employing us, the political parties, trade unions, other research staff associations, the regional administrations, the national parliament, and even the government to influence policy. And over the years, over these 20 years, we have had some successes that I listed there, and I will go on the specifics on the contract system in the next few slides. So this is the timeline for precarity in Spain since the start of democracy in our country about 50 years ago. So there was this age of fellowship in which people that were working in science had a fellowship to go on, and that meant that they had no social security, no health benefits, or no labor rights. And since 2011, we have moved into the age of contracts where people doing research essentially should have the same rights as any other worker, meaning social security, health benefits, and labor rights. So early on in this age of fellowship period, our government started implementing our first national science policy and developed a system for national fellowships to support people doing research. However, over the years, people became acquainted with all the problems caused by this system and with the differences with the rest of the workforce in the country. And this led to the creation of several research staff associations. The main first one was FGI Precarios, who really decided that they should lobby to eliminate fellowships and replace them with work contracts. So starting in 2000, they made many demonstrations, they visited many people, they pushed every key in the system to make changes, and this led to the creation at the Parliament of the first law of science that brought the replacement of fellowships for research with working contracts. However, the things that we got put into this first law of science of 2011 were not enough to reduce precarity. And so recently in 2022, we were able to introduce amendments in another law that became known as the law amending the law of science, that we hope that will reduce precarity even further. So, well, you see here the ideal scientific career according to the European Union, where you progress from a predoctoral position, which is an R1 position, then you become an R2, a postdoc. Hopefully, you would become eventually a group leader with independence and ability to attract funds. This is the R3 position, and eventually this progresses to the top level, which is the R4 of established professor position. So the law of science replaced the fellowships covering predoctoral students here with a 4-year predoc contract, which is the fixed term. And normally this should be extended up to 6 years if you had any disability, just to cover for the difficulties in getting the PhD thesis within the period. So this part was really solved here. Then for the next part, the postdoctoral part, they created a fixed term 2-year contracts that should cover the classical postdoctoral period of 2 years, so that you could do one or a couple or even more and more. But this had a problem because fixed term contracts under the Spanish worker law were really very limited. There were many rules of incompatibility because these were set up in the system to avoid the private sector to abuse the use of these fixed term contracts. So this was really creating absurd problems, like for example, after a couple of years, you could not keep working for the same group or even the same institution, because then the institution would be forced to make you an indefinite contract, and they were against that. So this was creating a treadmill of researchers that were coming from elsewhere to your group for a couple of years, then leaving and going elsewhere. And this was not helping developing a meaningful career. So that was not a really good idea. Then the 2011 law created a 6-year access contract to the system to enable the transition from the R2 to the R3 position. This was a fixed term contract. And hopefully at the end, there was the idea that somehow you would finally get an indefinite contract or tenure here, and this would help you eventually become an R4. But this transition here was not very well developed, and there were many problems because many people just finished their 6-year access contract and either they sued their institutions and got an indefinite contract in the tribunals, or elsewhere they were probably leaving for another position somewhere else. So the combination of these rules of incompatibility here for the fixed term contracts and the problem with the reduced number of positions in programs enabling the transition from this access contract into the full R3 position created what we call the postdoctoral valley of death of precarity, where there was this certain skulls of people that had treated the field and disappeared. Moreover, this was not helping other classes of scientific careers, because Of course, not everybody wants to become a group leader with the responsibilities of attracting funding and keeping the group working and so on. Some people just want to keep doing research at the R2 stage, and this is perfectly acceptable. But with this scheme, it was impossible to keep at the postdoc R2 position. So we kept lobbying hard our elders at the government. And in the end, in 2022, we achieved a series of breakthroughs. The first one was that we, in the same way that there was a transition from trying to make all the contracts for all the workforce in the country indefinite time, like the Norwegian model that Jorun has just shown to us. Well, the same was done in science. So there are still 2-year postdoc contracts of fixed term available for some postdocs, but those are now rare. And this has been, in theory, replaced by the contract of scientific and technical activities, which is an indefinite contract for as long as research funds are available for the group. So the postdoc is not having to worry about, I will just get this fund exhausted and what I will have to do. It is just a question of the institution. The institution, as long as they are able to allocate research funds to this contract, the contract will keep and carry on as any other contract. And this means that eventually, probably there will be a transition to a staff contract, but this depends on the institution. The second breakthrough is that there was an emphasis on regulating this transition from the access contract to the indefinite contract or tenure for group leaders. Actually, and this is because of recommendations of the European Union, this 6-year contract was scrapped to be replaced by a 3 to 6 year access contract, because if you start adding the numbers of years you could be here, well, usually you were 4 years as a doctoral student, normally most of us 4 years or 6 years as a postdoc, and then 6 additional years here. Well, you started to think of stability and not precarity when you were nearly 40, and that was unacceptable for European policymakers. So they reduced this access contract term and helped perform a more regulated transition here. So, and now standard ideal scientific careers are possible, and also just keeping at this R2 stage, because you don't want to become a research group leader, is essentially possible. So at least in theory, we have now a framework that is really working for careers in science, although there are many other things like the development of your research career and other things that should be fixed, and this will probably be done in further amendments of the law. So to finish, I just want to share these 3 take-home messages that I think they are important. The first one is that all those improvements have been possible because we have been lobbying hard for many, many years. So as I told you, Annie is now making the 20th anniversary, Precarity 24 years. So we have to lobby hard and for a long time. And efficient lobbying requires joining these research staff associations, and also your personal effort, because nobody is really giving anything for free. So either we organize and we keep lobbying and pestering everybody around, we will not advance. The second important thing is that creating a legal framework is not enough, because this is the stage where we are here now in Spain, and from what Ana Ferreira said before, they have the same problem in Portugal. You must convince your institutions to use this legal framework, because otherwise, if they can get away with not using it, they will do it. And this requires that you enlist the help of your trade unions. So this is something that we should never be afraid of doing. And the most important of these take-home messages is this. From the point of view of labor rights, researchers are workers just like any other worker, whether a plumber, a teacher, anyone else. The specifics of our job as scientists cannot mean that we have less rights ever than any other worker, because this is something that is coming up in discussions with people doing policy. Well, but you know, it is important that you keep being precarious because then you lose your edge, your competitiveness. And no, this is not true. We have seen it in all the previous presentations. The only way to keep people healthy and happy doing research without stress, without anxiety, without all these mental health problems, is just reducing precarity as much as possible. And well, this is all that I wanted to share today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Francisco. Thank you for giving us the view in Spain. Just to add that the 6-year contract, that the tenure is the tenure system, right? Comes with a change of law, but without funding as well.
Well, this is what we call tenure is like a functionary contract. And this happens, for example, in universities, but in other systems, it is not so easy. The Spanish system has 3 classes of institutions. One is hospitals, another is the research institutions of the state itself, and then the universities. So in the universities and research institutions, they both have this kind of tenure contracts. In the hospital system, it is not yet implemented. So this is why I say tenure or indefinite contract.